who listens in English. For everyone who needs it, we have
Saben,
live interpretation available.
enmarcar esta sesión de hoy
As you might know, today's session is within the Let's Connect program, which is a program started in February this year, that we're promoting on we're promoting a series of workshops in which we encourage everyone to connect. We promote the knowledge exchange, knowledge interchange between peers, basically. And this is a first clinic that we are doing in Spanish as a main language within this context, in relationship to how to make your first annual plan. So first, I want to mention that this program is a program that started, as I mentioned, in February this year, and it's open to everyone to share and to share whatever they might know. And due to
vamos a pasar por ahí un link.
I will share with you all
para que lo conozcan un poco más.
A link to the Let's Connect program so that you might know what else it's coming next. I will also announce that there's not the chance not only to go to the program, to the live sessions, but also the recorded sessions in Spanish and in other sessions that are relevant to the topics that we will have. And without further ado, first of all, I want to thank every one of you for expressing your wish to be here. I want to thank Anna Torres for her being here. She's the director of Wikimedia Argentina, but it's very clear that her work goes well beyond her daily 8 hours dedicated to Wikimedia Argentina. She has been key on growing the Wikimedian community in Latin America and the world at large. She has been key leader for volunteers, for organizers, for all projects within the Latin America region. And as many of you might know, she has just received an honorary mention as Wikimedian of the Year. So I without further ado, I want to give her the forum and thank her for being here, and let her tell us what she has in store for us today. I wish to thank our interpreter to continue their work in this. As mentioned, we have chat available for any question that you might have. We will get a session of questions and answers at the end. Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, night. I don't know exactly where you might be. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. And okay, yeah. First of all, thank you, everyone, for all your kind words towards me. And what I want to do today is to establish this as a safe space for everyone to share with you the things that we have done as Wikimedia Argentina. I want to share with you what a series of steps that I believe everyone can take in order to make your first annual plan. And of course, nothing of this is set in stone. There's no perfect model. There's no perfect way of planning. So we should always keep a very flexible mind, a very creative, open mind. So I wish to give you, I don't know, a series of tips on what to do. And obviously every chapter, every local group needs to hack these instructions, these tips and adapt it to their local context. I'm of course open to every question that you might have. I won't be looking at chat because I can focus on 2 things at a time, but feel free to stop me at any time so that this is open to all participants. You feel free to raise your hand on the Zoom platform. If you feel like I'm speaking too fast, please also let me know. So on the other side, there's Sandy, who is always helping us, supporting us on these kinds of important events where translations are needed. I want Andy to have a nice moment. If you see that I'm going too fast, please let me know. Uh, Before I start with the presentation proper, I wish to share my screen with you. Here with me today is Carolina, who is my colleague in Wikimedia Argentina. I don't know if you can say hello. Can you
Sí,
say
puedo.
something?
Hola a todos. Gracias, Ana, por la
Yes, I can. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for the presentation. Thank you, Mercedes. And yes, of course, she's part of Wikimedia Argentina. She's part of the team. She's responsible for developing alliances with institutions. And she's here today because she's obviously a key part of Wikimedia Argentina, but also because um, whenever we talk about planning, these plans are rarely done alone. And when I say alone, I mentioned this is a creative process made by a team. As you might know, every creative output requires or is better served as a couple, as a pair, so that there's usually a way to get ideas back and forth. Carolina is precisely that partner, with whom I can share in these very tiring, very demanding times. And having this back and forth is a key process in letting us arrive to where we need whenever we're starting to make an annual plan.
Un poquito más lento para la presentación. Gracias.
Por favor, claro. Voy a compartir pantalla. Porque creo
Yes, I will share my screen with you.
¿Están viendo mi pantalla?
Can you see my screen now? Yes. Thank you very much.
Ahora sí que yo estoy como un poco
Okay, so I'm here. I see a few faces, but I can't see everyone. So everyone, feel free to stop me if you need to ask something. So here today, what Caro and I we will try to explain to you is the step-by-step of how to make a strategic planning. What do we mean when we say strategic planning? I always define it as a drawing of some kind, the drawing of the organization, the drawing of the work that we want to see enacted in the future. This is the long, medium, or long term in the future. This is a drawing in which there's made of many different pieces made, and this is a drawing that envisions what we want to see in the future. I always want to start with this quote. A good strategy is that which allows you to reach your objectives using whatever media, whatever resources you have at hand to build the organization that we want. The Wikimedia movement is particular, it's unique in the sense that we usually copy a lot. There's already many models, and within Wikimedia movement, we have learned from many others, learning how things are made, how things are supposed to be done. How, for instance, how should we make an education program? And for instance, and a good part of this is learning the appropriate context for every plan. We need to understand which are the available resources for every specific context. What we need to keep in mind for any kind of planning is that every plan needs to be realistic within the context, within the available resources, so that the objectives can actually be reached. So so the phases that I think strategic planning needs to perform, and of course all of this can become even more complex. But this is these are the most common steps. First of all, the mission, which is the purpose of these organizations, the why, for instance, Wikimedia Argentina exists, or Wikimedia Chile, Wikimedia Uganda, whatever it is, why it is that the organization exists, why is it, what is the reason for being. Then there's the vision, which is the long-term vision, the long-term goal. How will the world become, how will the world be when we reach it? Then our strategic priorities. This is our main goals for the future, for the next few years, for the next year, for instance. So I know that many of us usually make an annual plan. It's possible to make plans for 2, maybe 3 years. Wikimedia Argentina, for instance, has a 3-year plan, but it's also very realistic to make one 1-year plan. And these should be the most important areas for the available period. So even if we want to make something 10 years from now, we need to know something from only 10 from the only 3 years, whatever the plan it is. And then there's the main objectives.
Marco de evaluación, en tener un marco de evaluación acorde para poder evaluar.
Now we need, for the last step, we need to establish a framework. What we want to perform, how are we supposed to measure whatever it is that we are doing? Whenever we are talking about a framework, we are talking about learning. We are talking about what are we supposed to learn in this plan, in this step. So I divided this into 4 fundamental steps. The first, the most important one, or one of the most important ones, is first step is to listen and review. What I mean with this is that we should be able to uncover the challenges, the weaknesses, the strengths that we have within us in our contexts. What are our resources, what our available resources, what are the resources that we don't have? What are the immediate challenges that we see? What are the opportunities that we see? And what are the things that we simply cannot tackle at this point in time? For instance, because being able to know, being able to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of an organization is one of the most vital parts of this process. And I come back to the idea of this as a creative process. Going beyond even your creative partner, which is Carol, for instance, at this moment, it's good that at this point that all the organization is involved in this part. I'm talking about the team, I'm talking about volunteer. I'm talking that everyone is part of this key process. I speak about the actual governance structures of the organization. Of course, this is important in a later part when we talk about this is important when we need to talk about who is and who is not being part of this plan. I know maybe everyone here knows what an SWOT analysis is, but this is explicit. This is more or less what it is. Making some kind of analysis, analyzing your own organization, your own country as a single unit, as if it were a single project. What can we see on the inner and outer perspective? Who should be involved? Who shouldn't we involve? We should, of course, use this step to understand ourselves very well. Our internal analysis, of course, is who are we as an organization? What are our strengths and weaknesses? Who are we? What kinds of things we have done, we do? What are the things that we wish to do? This will become later, and when we speak of evaluation. What is our current team? Whether it can perform whatever it is that we want to do. What are the key components that we might be missing? These two might seem like very trivial things, but trivial steps, but they can become very, very complex. But of course, we need to go very deep as possible with these two, so that we know where we are, where we have been, and more importantly, where we can be in a realistic matter. What can we do right now, and where we can go in the future, and most importantly, what we cannot do. I think I have an example here. Okay, before I continue, I need to talk about involving our counterparts. Sometimes we don't take into account our counterparts, but we always have to deal with external obstacles. Why is it important with this? Why do I talk about taking into account our counterparts? Because they help us they help us analyze who exactly or which strengths and weaknesses we have. They help us understand how the organization is understood from the outside. This helps us understand how how everyone is acting. So of course, these kinds of perspectives from the outside also help us to understand how volunteers are coming into the movement. So this is more or less really thinking out of the box. So the Wikimedia movement is pretty much an inside the box organization. We know ourselves, we do similar things, but bringing an outsider perspective helps us, of course, opening up our possibilities. I want to play with you. I want to. We will be playing with a specific example that I invented. Tarragona is the city where I was born, so I am inventing Wikimedia Tarragona. We will imagine that there exists Wikimedia Tarragona. My inner strengths, as for instance, I am making an analysis of my own organization, and I can see, for instance, my inner strength is that I have previous alliances, and that I have a very small community that is very united, but it's also very dispersed. My external analysis, for instance, might be that the Wikimedia Tarragona is recognized, but for instance, teachers in Tarragona consider that Wikimedia is not a priority. It's not a tool that should not be used. It's something that does not belong in the schools. So when we have this landscape of this analysis landscape, we should be able to choose which ones are the opportunities to which we say yes, which one are the things that we will work on, and which ones will be the things that we will not work on. Maybe we don't have enough resources, enough human resources, enough community. It cannot be sustainable, for instance. So what I do usually is make a very strict evaluation of what do I have in terms of resources, and I mean with resources, of course, I mean money, and I mean the team. I need to know about the context. What is the context favorable to me, and how feasible is it for us to actually perform, to actually reach the objective. For instance, all of this is, of course, I wish to restate that all of this is an example that I'm taking out of my mind. For instance, in this part, in this example, whether the cultural organizations see me as something positive, it's positive for me. Maybe I don't have enough people. If I don't have enough people and we wish to inquire into new ways of working, then we might not be able to cover everything. So, for instance, if 75% of the population considers that Wikipedia is not useful, then maybe as we would say, I'm fighting a losing fight. Maybe it's not the smartest choice to engage with that population in particular, but it's also at the same time an opportunity to change perspective on Wikipedia. The same thing happens with other things. if I may not have the available resources right now, but I may have the resources to train someone else. So this is also a positive. This is the kinds of questions that we make ourselves to know exactly if we are going in a particular direction or another, or we are deciding to skip. So first, this is the first step to evaluate ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and then to generate, well, some kind of matrix that helps us take action, take decisions. The number two step is to make ideas, is something that you might have seen already, to define the vision and mission of this organization. The vision expresses the ultimate vision of the organization, and the mission, of course, answers to the question, who do we want to become in the future, maybe 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is.
Refleja el objetivo de la organización en particular.
The mission reflects the organization's objectives. From here it is that we start defining our more specific goals. And at the same time, the specific goals are the ones that will ultimately lead to fulfilling the mission. These, of course, they have several attributes. They need to be measurable, they need to be specific, they need to be easily remembered. So back to our example, Wikimedia Tarragona. For instance, our vision is well, we in the Wikimedia movement, we have a very similar vision, which is to imagine a world where every human being can freely share in the sum of the knowledge of all humankind. For instance, our mission is to allow the Tarragona population to be able to access, to create, to use, to share the knowledge that represents themselves, that represents their local communities, and that represents them on the internet at large. So the mission is contributing to the global vision, to the overall vision from a local perspective. The number 3 step is the actual planification. And this is the largest part of it all. When I talk about planning, I talk about being able to establish a series of goals or objectives that contribute to the mission, but that are explicit in context, in a time context, maybe 1 year, maybe 2, 3 years, maybe 5 years. So whatever. So goals help us, these specific goals will help us achieve the overall mission, taking into account, of course, the local context evaluation that we have done, and set them to be real, to be realistic. These are a few tips from your friend in Argentina, so that you can actually make this and not die trying.
Consejitos de amiga.
A few tips. First of all, to prioritize. It's impossible to do everything. So at the end of the day, everyone should prioritize. We should find some kind of balance between whatever it is that we are doing, and it's okay, and whatever it is that we might give them some kind of advantage. You can think of it as a competitive advantage in our organization. We all have something that makes us different from everyone else something that makes us stand out in our particular context. Wikimedia Argentina, for instance, is very particular in what we do in our context. And it's very, very likely also very, very different from what Uruguay does. So these differential objectives is what makes us different. So we should prioritize whatever it is that makes us stand out from everyone else. So we cannot, you should remember that you cannot do everything. So if we need to start from something small to grow up, it's better to make baby steps, to make sustainable steps that ultimately allow us to generate knowledge. This is preferable to trying to make everything, because this is not only overwhelming, but also burns everyone out. And it also doesn't always give us the best results. So this is my tip. Then what I mentioned before, planning means involving every part of the organization. So please do not make your plans alone. If you're only one person, well, reunite yourself with allies. But if you can involve two, three, four people, get together to start planning, start working even asynchronously, but start involving all parts of the organization. Because at the implementation plan, we should all be, so to speak, on the same page. We should all know what it is that is meant with the goals that will be established. So the idea is this, that every step of the structure is involved in this.
Tenemos alguien que quiere hacer un comentario de una experiencia.
Sorry, we have a comment on this.
Yeah.
Could we give them?
Buenas tardes, qué gusto.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's nice to see you, Anna, my colleague, and everyone who might be listening. Okay, so I should say to everyone that here in Colombia, we are doing this planning process ourselves. So we agree completely with what Anna is saying. And for us, this starting step is a self-evaluation to see exactly how we are, who we are, what it has worked, what did work the previous year, what things we have learned, and what things we need to change or adjust. So this is one of the first lessons that we would like to share with everyone. Number two is that for regarding our vision, it's very important for us to think of a specific future.
O el futuro a 2023. Entonces,
so because what we thought would happen by 2080 has already started happening at 2023.
Ser X
So we could start thinking, what do we want to do by 2030? Who will we be? Which ideas will be our flagship ideas? And lastly, what we want to do is to involve people who might not know us. For instance, people who might not know Wikipedia because, okay, they just know that it exists, but they don't know Wikimedia. So we approach that which we call the readers that might not know exactly how Wikimedia or Wikipedia works at large, but they might have valuable ideas on how to increase coverage, how to reach more people.
Que esas expectativas pueden alimentar también.
And we should always take into account that their outsider perspective is always useful. So this is something very useful for us in the first part. So this is all for me today. Thank you, Anna, for teaching us, for sharing with us. Okay, this is something very interesting, which is the self-evaluation of the organization is, at the end, we need to analyze our internal context or local context. Many things are born and grow from something that ultimately was grown. So please also don't be afraid to make mistakes. We committed many mistakes in the first few years. It is very hard to actually find how everything works together, to find something that is meaningful for the local context. It's hard to make it solid over time. It's hard to make it grow. It's hard to find trust, to grow trust in others. So please do not be afraid to try things that might not go well the first time around, but these will ultimately be a learning experience for everyone.
Si bien tenemos contextos similares, ¿no? Porque creo que
please even bear in mind that even if we have similar contexts, for instance, between Colombia and Argentina, well, our context is Latin America, which is more or less similar. We are more or less close. We have similar language. So in our context might be similar, but in spite of that, the particulars of every local context end up mattering a lot in the results that we can have as an organization. So we need to abstract ourselves from that. We need to, when we evaluate, you need to also take into account starting from a blank page. You need to understand that every organization is unique. What you're bringing to the Wikimedia movement is unique. The Wikimedia movement at large wouldn't be the same without Uganda, without Austria, without every country. So whatever it is that you can bring to the table is also unique. So there's no need to make a carbon copy from everyone else. This is something that I want to establish. I think that Wikimedia Argentina actually started growing the minute we stopped looking to the outside and we started focusing on what we wanted to do. On the minute we stopped copying others, that is when Wikimedia Argentina actually started to become itself. So do not be afraid to look in the mirror and really identify what it is that makes everyone else unique. And then there's my other tip is to be ambitious, but focused on what can actually happen. We need to be learning, but we need also to remember that learning takes time. And during that learning time, you actually need to be making something. We don't want to be biting more than we can chew, so to speak. Because with what we know, you can already start doing things, and we can even keep growing. We can keep expanding. I always talk about Wikimedia Argentina because, okay, I've been here for a number of years, but we began in 2014, and it was only me. I had only one person in communications, then a person have part in education, and that was our first small program. And it took us 2 years to actually solidify it, to work with. Our fundamental program was education. Everything else started growing from it. Once the education program was solid, was very well established, everything else went from it. This is what worked for us. It doesn't mean that it should be the same for you, but it's just an idea. This is just an example. This is why I want to put this example. A good planning is balanced. It's balanced in regard to well-being. Maybe you overworking, undersleeping, working on weekends, working on holidays. It's not. Please do not. Planning does not mean that you need to burn out. So please, I come back to the first step. You need to prioritize. If you are making a good priority, if you are setting your priorities straight, the priorities that will lead you to the results, or you're prioritizing correctly, you should slowly but surely going forward. But also prioritizing makes you leave stuff behind. So it's very common for us that the year starts and you have, I don't know, 10, 20 allies that want to work with you. So who will you actually work with you? Who do you want to work with? Who will you leave behind? You have to start asking yourself who it is that you want to work with. If you have an established line, an established goal, this will be much easier to answer. So maybe you can ask yourself, saying, okay, this year, for instance, which alliances will actually help me further my goals, and which one will not. Maybe we can meet together with some organizations by mid-year. Be strategic about when and who to say no to. This is hard to learn, of course, but we need to do it. So when we talk about priorities, it doesn't mean that we have a long list. So we think that of priorities as having a long list, So my tip would be no more than 3 priorities, maybe 5. I don't know. When I was preparing this talk, I was looking at grants. I was looking at groups that have 5 or 6 priorities. Maybe some have 3. We have 3 major programs, for instance.
Mi consejito de amiga es que 3 es un
my tip is that 3 is a good number, 2 is a good number, 4 is a good number, but I wouldn't go beyond 5. So we should always include our program and organizational goals within our plans. Our organizational goals should be let me look, should be simple. The organizational goals should be as large or as small as the organization itself is. Thinking about training your team, thinking about I don't know, other things. But preparing your team is as important as the content that you will be bringing to Wikimedia. A plan that is adequate to the mission and the specific challenges that you might meet. And whenever you can, these goals should be as measurable and concrete as possible. This doesn't mean over measuring. This just means having some kind of some kind of concrete measure so that you can know whether you are achieving your goal or you are not. So let's look at an example. Going back to Wikimedia Tarragona. Our mission and vision, as we mentioned, is focused on creating relevant content and relevant content to the local community. Within our opportunities were the local alliances, the local policies, the educative sector. So we had a good cohesive community. So which one are the goals that I can think of? I'm sorry, because I'm sharing because I talk about metas and objetivos, which are not the same in Spanish. But the goals that I'm talking about are relatively broad. The objectives are perhaps smaller in scope, and they refer to how exactly are we accomplishing our goals. Our first goal is, for instance, to involve all teachers in Tarragona, to involve them with how to access the Wikimedia projects as pedagogical tools. Our second goal would be, for instance, to strengthen alliances with our local cultural instances. So again, this is relatively concrete. We know who, we know what, we know how. Number 3, given that we have a relatively cohesive community that I wish to grow, so my goal is to strengthen, to grow, to diversify the community, the local community, so that the community at large is sustainable. So 3 goals at large. Why 3? Well, one with teachers, because we have seen that even if teachers have a negative perception of Wikimedia, they're also a big opportunity for us. So the negative 75% perception can actually be modified. Why do I talk about cultural institutions? Well, because it's the most favorable goal. They already have trust in Wikimedia. They already want to work with us. So my mission, which is to have more Tarragona content in Wikimedia, working with cultural institutions is what makes more sense to further that goal. And the third goal, why do I talk about strengthening my community? Because this is the only way in which we can accomplish more goals or sustain our goals in the future. This is, of course, an example. And then this is perhaps the quid of this. So let's think of the first goal that I mentioned. working with teachers. So, for instance, these are our specific objectives. This is an example to promote the Wikimedia projects with at least 100 teachers. We could also make to start building a network of education professionals so that they can be ambassadors of Wikimedia projects in their own communities. And for instance, is to make 3 pilot programs.
Habíamos visto que no había conectividad en las aulas y a lo mejor se me dificulta mucho ir con los proyectos Wikimedia porque no tengo los recursos para poner conectividad en las aulas. No.
We should also be mindful of the available technological resources, for instance. So for each one of these objectives, I have some sort of measuring, some sort of indicator. This is the metric. I like my measures to have a mix of quantitative and qualitative measures. On the quantitative side, we have strong hard data. So, for instance, if I make an event and only one person shows, even if that institution is perfect, but only one person shows up, and this is the only person that shows up again and again and again, then we might need to change schools because it doesn't make sense to have a program in a perfect location with only one person. So,
pero lo cual es fundamental para 2 cosas. Primero, para construir historias, porque la evaluación también es narrativa y la evaluación también son historias. Y segundo, para aprender, para evaluar o para medir de manera más concreta el cambio. O sea, los cambios están...
We should be able to measure change. We should be able to measure what exactly is the impact that we will be having.
Y también el impacto de nuestras acciones. Y eso se mide...
The impact of our actions is largely measured on the qualitative and the quantitative, not only on the quantitative side. So we have our number of participants as metric, but I don't want to just have 100. I want these 100 teachers to be representative of the whole geographic region at large. So I'm talking about not just the number, but I don't want them to be just listeners. I want them to walk out with having learned, being enthusiastic about it all. Well, the second point, when we're talking about a network, creating a network, for instance, we can measure, for instance, how many hours have we worked together. I think that measuring worked hours is a good way of getting some sort of idea of how much and where we are working. Number 3, we cannot forget about students, and we also can measure how their work and their perception of Wikipedia changes. So we have on the first column the objective, and the second column the way of measuring it. With the third column we have activities, and my tip would be to be as broad as possible. We tend to be as detailed as possible. And we want to say, for instance, 5 editathons, or we want to make 10 photography contests. But the thing here is that then things tend to change, and then our main objective of being flexible in our plan it becomes very constrained. So I like to leave it relatively broad, saying something like we will increase the content of Wikimedia. Why? How? Through editathons, through photo contests. And think about this very well. if you leave your goal to be relatively broad, maybe you can stumble upon opportunities that you can take that actually further your goals, even if you weren't expecting them.
Voy a tener que cambiar todo esto por este motivo. O sea, mi recomendación es que lo más amplio posible. O sea, lo más amplio posible.
My recommendation would be for this to be as broad as possible in terms of community. Then, of course, the fourth column is the expected results. For instance, we are talking about Wikimedia being considered on Classroom as something positive. This is, for instance, a broad overview. I don't want to talk a lot about to save time. And so we will go to the fourth step. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay, number 4 is the evaluation and adjusting. I mentioned adjusting because I mentioned this cycle of evaluation and adjusting is maybe more important or as important as the final evaluation. So why is this important? Because obviously we need to identify whether we are reaching our objectives, our goals. It also allows us to identify whether we are approaching new opportunities. Always having a constant state of evaluation also allows us to change, adapt if necessary. There's always available opportunities all around, and then we should be adapting to them, of course. We should, evaluating also allows us to start building our narratives, because this is much more, this is not all about numbers. Something funny that happens in Wikimedia Argentina is that at the beginning of the year, we know, I know what I want to tell. I know what I want to, so the planification I make with the story that I want to tell. So evaluating is also narrating. It's also an important part that we can, this narrative that we will be building. This story should have, of course, a central story that, what's the word? Something that gives it, that sustains it, of course, that I don't know, I don't like the word, I can't find the words. Something that makes it make sense. Something central that gives it sense, gives it purpose. So for me, story is fundamental in. So this step is maybe as good, the same thing as with the planning. Involve everyone, you know, involve your community, involve your volunteers. Ask them to help you spot where you're going well, where you're going wrong. So try, please, every 2, 3, 6 months to evaluate and adjust to see how you should adapt the plan to the changing circumstances around you. And obviously, you should give data so that you can build. Having hard data is the hard data cannot lie to you. So having hard data helps you knowing what you should not do, and also what you should continue doing. How do we evaluate in Wikimedia Argentina? How do I do it? For me, it's important to have a framework, an evaluation framework through strategic questions. And so we are asking the fundamental questions of what did we learn and what do we want to learn. The question is what our programs are actually helping our beneficiaries. Is our work actually helping the emerging communities to develop? Why are my programs fundamental in bringing, for instance, more women to the Wikimedia movement? There's always a why. why the project exists as it is. And this why is the questions that we should try to have. This is what I was talking about making some kind of narrative and involving everyone in your community. This is an evaluation matrix, for instance, that I like to make this. These are the questions that we have. For instance, back to our example of Wikimedia Tarragona, we have a series of opportunities. We have defined our mission and vision, and we have defined our strategic goals. We have our specific objectives. So how do we evaluate? I'm seeing only at objective number one, but bear in mind that this is the same for everything. Our question here would be how our beneficiaries are choosing us to increase their skills. Are their skills, are their knowledge actually improving through our activities? Well, that's the question. So my metric, my way of measuring would be to measure how and what they are learning. We're expecting them to actually learn. Another question would be whether we are actually achieving the results that we set for ourselves. Do we have the available resources? Are we actually on track? Well, this is all that we have to ask ourselves. We could be asking ourselves, for instance, number three, for instance, asking ourselves whether our work is actually flourishing, making flourishing diversity within the community. So we could be asking, what is the geographical diversity? What is for instance, we mentioned about strengthening our community. So how many hours, for instance, is our community working? So these are, for instance, a few questions that I used to start planning, to keep on planning. These strategic questions do not have to multiply. You could make do with 5 or 6 or maybe even less, but this help us, this guide us, because when we are about to tell our story, we can help tell it with these questions and these answers. So when we make the final narrative for the Wikimedia Tarragona, we can say what exactly happened with my activities. I could say, for instance, that not only do we attract the teachers, but also my community has grown, and these are two intertwined objectives. So, for instance, and as the last point, other point to consider is to we should talk about how to implement things. Of course, I don't include it here because it's very context specific. It very much depends on how every group works. So we are relatively uncommon in our ways of working. So we should always know exactly the available tools. For instance, making some sort of chronogram, some sort of schedule of activities, so that you should, for instance, make education activities when everyone is on vacation or where the teachers are not available. So these are the things that you should know ahead of time. Also, you should map the beneficiaries. You should have an idea of who your beneficiaries are. Who are your allied institutions? Who are your target audiences? Who will ultimately benefit from this? In Tarragona, for instance, we were talking about teachers. We were talking about the teachers directly, the students indirectly, the indigenous communities directly, the cultural organizations directly. So we should have an idea of this is why we make some sort of map. Of course, making a map of your associates And something that you should always keep in mind is your budget, which is of course goes hand in hand with your planification. This is of course what feeds the budget. The budget is built upon what the plan mentioned and vice versa. In the case of Wikimedia Argentina, we build it like this because, of course, we have some flexibility in how we raise money, but sometimes if these are international funds, well, the budget might be closed, and what we do is work from how much money do we have. For instance, but this plan and budget feed into each other. And just to finalize, we should think and adapt. There's a saying that I like very much. Okay, I'm trying to translate it. That those who think you're just thinker, but you need to actually implement things. The actual implementation should be part of our agenda. We should dedicate time to think what exactly we are doing and when we are doing it. This is all, of course, not a linear path. This is not always an easy path, but it's also a very creative step. This is also a very it is through this thinking that the more strategic points, the more strategic thoughts come afloat. I'm talking about the VUCA context, which is the context in which everything is very flexible. For instance, now that the pandemic hit us, everyone, and forced us to change everything, and we are now many of us are in a constantly changing, constantly evolving context. So plans right now need to be open, flexible. They need to change. They need to be able to transform. The plan is there to help us, of course, but the plan also needs to adapt to whatever comes in the future. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope I haven't bored you to death. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna. And we have more or less the luxury of half an hour to share, to ask questions, to get answers. If someone has a question, please add them to the chat or raise your hand and we can go one by one. Ana Maria, you have from Wikimedia Colombia. Thank you, Marce. Thank you, Anna. This example is actually very close to reality, so this is a good example for us. I have two comments on our experience in Colombia. The first is that we want to think evaluation as something that happens continuously, permanently. So we follow up with things every 2 or 3 months. We are actually figuring out which is the better one, but this evaluation is permanent, a permanent fixture. So the idea is to know exactly where to focus and where we might need to have a plan B or maybe plan C. So maybe we have need to make these plans in advance. And regarding the midterm informs, what we made was to use this midterm evaluation as the starting point for the final year reports.
Sino que fuera también un informe que sirviera para
what we wanted to make is that this midterm is a learning resource, is a thinking resource for us, something that will help us for the next year. And of course, sharing this with our various communities.
No es solo el resultado en sí, sino
of course, evaluation is not about the result in itself, but also about sharing who we are at the moment, what are we doing at the moment, sharing with the governance authorities if relevant. So these are future learnings. So these are my two main comments that I have.
Wikimedia Colombia.
This is what we are experiencing now at Wikimedia Colombia. This is, of course, very, very interesting. This is something that I didn't mention, which is the scenario planning, which is thinking about possible scenarios. This is, of course, we live in very uncertain times. And as you mentioned, we need to have plan B and plan C for lots of things. So if you have whenever you can, please also consider that there are times in which you cannot have a plan B or plan C, but you will need to leave things on standby and stop. It's all right. Don't worry. I share with you an example here in Wikimedia Argentina. Between what we say we want to do and what we actually do, we make actually the 80% of what we plan to do. There's about 20% of what we thought we could do, but due to circumstances beyond our control or other opportunities, due to changing priorities, they were dropped. Priorities, of course, change with the times. So we need to embrace this, of course. For everything else, we should always have some sort of plan B or plan C, precisely just to know what to do in unexpected cases, so that we can keep working whatever may come. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
André, Andrés de la casa.
¿Me escuchás ahora? ¿Se me escucha?
Sí, te escucho, querida.
Bueno, yo te quería preguntar.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something. This is all very interesting for me. As always, this is very interesting. Thank you for what you teach us with your experiences. I want to ask you about evaluations.
¿Cómo hacer las evaluaciones?
Do you use any specific methodology? Do you have any tips?
Es una de las cosas que a nosotros nos interesa.
This is one of the things that we are most interested in how to evaluate regarding qualitative and quantitative aspects. Evaluating quantity, of course, is relatively easier. Metrics are easier, but how can we make a useful evaluation? There are several mechanisms, of course. One that we use a lot is satisfaction surveys, the post-project, the post-activity surveys. We also want to, when we have a minute with smaller groups, we sit with them directly to ask them how they liked, what they would change. So this is a very useful tool. Then there's I have another which is useful for measuring how perception changes. For instance, how perception changes on Wikimedia, on Wikipedia, on you make it two surveys, one pre and one post event, so you can have some sort of knowledge on what's the perception before and after. You can measure how perception changes. There's also focus groups, which Caro might know better about, but something that we have thought about is measuring exactly what it is that our beneficiaries understand. How do they define us? How do they know us? Do they define us as a technical organization, as social organization, as a knowledge organization? We have thought that our most stable alliances, we could make some sort of focus group with them at the end of the year, so that maybe we can make a teachers focus group, maybe a cultural focus group, so that we can rotate this participation. But these, of course, are several ways to evaluate.
Perdón, Andy. Perdón.
Creo que luego está Carla. Y les recuerdo de hablar lento y pausado para ayudar a nuestra interpretación.
Ok, gracias, Mercedes. Bueno,
Thank you, Mercedes. Thank you for this talk. This was very interesting. This was you covered up many topics that I wanted to. I want to bring up first of all that fact that you never finish up this learning process.
Que siempre estamos pidiendo ayuda y siempre ellos están ahí para nosotros. Entonces seguimos aprendiendo.
I want to thank Wikimedia Argentina because you are always there for us.
Con todo el crecimiento que hay de las comunidades.
With all the growth that we are experiencing in our communities and how the perspectives are changing, it's particular for Wikipedia, for Wikimedia, towards its volunteers. I wanted to ask you, how can we create spaces where the community actually meets, where the staff meets community? Because I feel, or well, we are looking in El Salvador that the perspective from those of us who are building community, it doesn't always fit the perspective coming from librarians, coming from knowledge workers, from other Wikipedia editors who have other ways of looking or engaging with the creative process. Okay, yes, this is a topic, yes, this is a big topic on the relevance of Wikipedia's relevance. This is something that affects everyone pretty much the same. So this is not something that is different in different geographical regions, and it's not that you have it necessarily different. Here in Argentina, we have edited on topics that we have mentioned that are not relevant. So we have suffered the same perception that we are not relevant. But what we actually can do is to help people understand how it is that Wikipedia understand how the Wikimedia projects work, how we work together, so that we minimize this question of relevancy. This, of course, for us is always, you can always count on us whenever you need us. If you might need to have a one-on-one meeting or more recurrent meeting or with a small group so that we can help each other in this tortuous path of Wikimedia project, you count on us. But what I want to tell you is that this is not that you are doing something wrong. It's that the relevancy problem of Wikipedia is it's a common problem to pretty much every one of us who work in Wikimedia projects. This is a common to all of us.
Gracias. Hay una pregunta en el chat.
Thank you. We have a question on chat from Carlos Mora. I will read it out loud so that you can interpret it. You mentioned that every plan should focus on the country by country situation, but this applies mostly for the affiliates based on geographical regions. When it comes to thematical affiliates, is there anything else that we should understand whenever when we make our annual plans? Well, of course, when I mention context, I mention it geographically because it's the easiest one to understand, but the context is very much a knowledge thing. When we think context, we think of the context in which your project will live. If your project is entirely digital, like Wikipedia's, your analysis should be of the digital space. For instance, I want to write about 50 articles on women's biographies, and I have 0 references. So within this context, this is very unsustainable in this particular context. If this is a thematical group, what we are seeing in the Wikimedia movement is that, for instance, these projects happen across borders, but it also tends to impact the geographical as well. So maybe you could make some sort of segmented analysis depending on the actual or a mixed analysis, which includes geographical and thematical analysis. So when I mention territory, I mention any territory which might be actually geographical or might be topical, could be a very regional, could be, for instance, when I mentioned Tarragona is just a single city of 100,000 inhabitants. I wasn't talking about Spain or Catalonia, but something very specific. So territory doesn't mean a geographical location.
No sé si alguien más tiene alguna pregunta.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions. Hello, everyone. May I? Yeah, because I saw no one asking, so I want to ask.
Bien, estaba escribiendo mi observación.
Okay, I was writing my point. First of all, Anna and Mercedes, thank you. This has been very interesting. This has been very, very clear for every one of us, at least when it comes to the way in which I work, in which I really don't have any doubts.
Escribamos el proyecto con nuestro grupo y pensemos las cosas. Quizás aún así, la charla está más bien orientada desde...
So this talk is more oriented to the design of an annual plan, to talking about affiliates, talking about chapters or user groups, of course, as Wikimedia Argentina or, well, other countries.
Todos voluntarios, somos un grupo de
For instance,
Wikimedistas.
in our case, we are a group of volunteers. Wikimedia Argentina becomes an ally, of course.
El diseño que vos comentaste es el protagonista, que se alía con instituciones culturales, educativas.
You mentioned that Wikimedia Argentina is a protagonist that allies with someone else, and we are the reverse. We are the educative group that are allies with others. No, you are the protagonists. Wikimedia Argentina would be an ally for you. Could be an important ally for you but you are the protagonists in this plan. As Wikimedians of La Plata, this is exactly what we spoke of the other way, talking about where do you want to go, but the protagonist role is yourself. Think of Tarragona. You are the protagonists, and in this case, we are merely the ally. This is there's a bad perception here. Maybe I was very focused on the chapter name because, well, it's the first thing that came to mind. But if you're a user group, if you are a group of volunteers, you are not any lesser than any one of us, than any other chapter. What I mean is that just because you're all volunteers, obviously your analysis will be different when it comes to resources, to making your own plans. You can think of what you need, but you can also know what you have and you don't have, maybe resources, financial resources. But Wikimedia Argentina is not bigger, it's not greater. We might have more expertise, we might have more miles under our badge, but you are the ones that are the protagonists of your own story, and we are the ones that will help you, aid you. But so please do not make any difference between our communities. Yes, I agree with. I was thinking about how we establish these alliances. Is it any differently because Wikimedia Tarragona might ally itself with universities? And we, for instance, we might have for allies Wikimedia Argentina. No. For instance, because in my plan, you are my allies. For Wikimedia Tarragona, if Wikimedia Tarragona would work with you, with Wikimedistas del Plata, you are allies. But when I see it from your perspective of Wikimedistas de la Plata, in your grant application, you need to explain what it is, who it is your ally, regardless of who is who.
Lo vemos más en detalle, Fer,
we can talk this into greater detail later if you want to. Yes, I understand. I have many things to talk about, and yes, of course, if we have opportunity, we should discuss it later, but thank you very much for this.
No sé si alguna pregunta, pero me gustaría
I don't know if there's any other question, but I want to make one, talking to your experience, talking about how Wikimedia Argentina was only 2 people in 2014, and now that how could you recommend to us, to these smaller groups, how could you, these groups that are purely volunteer-led, how can they make this next step? How can they further organize themselves? How can we, something that I've listened is, how do we graduate from being just volunteers? And what happens, what can we do when a group such as us, such as yours, fractures because some people stop being volunteers and start being staff? Okay, yes. First of all, the idea is not to try to bite more than you can chew. When I was small, for instance, when I was a teen, my father, when I was 15, I thought of myself I had 18. That's what my father told me. If you think you are 18 now, you will lose the 15, your 16, 17 year. You will lose stages of lives, and this is the same. If we don't run unnecessarily, you can have baby steps and more concrete steps. So there's no difference between large and small organizations, large and small groups. There are some groups in this movement that have only 2 or 3 people and are doing amazing things, and they've been able to balance the balance between volunteers and staff. Of course, the moment when staff enters, everything needs to change. The organization itself needs to change, because there's an accountability issue of, I don't know the word, but yes, there's a need to be there for that person. That person is now working for so that the organization or the volunteer group shines ultimately. So this is what we as a staff are doing. But it's also interesting to see how things reconfigure. Wikimedia Argentina in the end has been very flexible so that we can all be what we want to be. If your organization wants to, for instance, is now very small, but you want to grow it to something more structured, you want it you see it to be more formal, more structured, with clearer governance, you will be able to make it like that. If you wish to stay as a smaller, structureless group, but with someone who will actually help you get your objectives, then that is also possible. So here in Wikimedia, the Wikimedia movement, we're not obligated to anything. We've seen groups that are afraid, right, of thinking of things like having to pay salaries, having to incur these administrative costs, and having to incur as a bureaucracy, the fear of becoming a bureaucracy. So this is so this is what it's all about. Our movement is having maybe a common vision, but a very different ways of working. So this is what we are making with Wikimedistas of La Plata. We have some money for administrative questions, and they wish to grow, then we will help them in this. Of course, we will help them along the way. we will help them in administrative tasks. And just like Wikimedia Argentina, there are many other Wikimedias, so that the emerging communities can grow at their own time, and they are not left behind, that they have access to the same resources. So that the communities can grow, can walk at their own pace. I think that when it comes to knowledge equity, something that is very important for this is to allow everyone to walk at their own pace. There are, of course, larger structures that can help, that we may help smaller in that sense, but and for instance, we in our first 4 years, we stayed at maybe 3 people, and we wanted to consolidate ourselves, consolidate our projects first, consolidate our allies first, and we had to build exactly what we wanted to do. This is a very reflexive step that takes time, and when we started growing, we had growing pains. Of course, we thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we had it all, but so this is my advice to you. Please do not try to skip stages. Having more or fewer staff members does not make you any better than anyone else. There's many Wikimedias around you that can help you in this process. There's people with expertise and experience now. I've been in places where there's incredible tensions, where their power balances are very imbalanced, governance problems. We have experience in that, so we can help you in growing this, in walking these paths. Yes. Thank you, everyone. We have only 3 minutes left. Maybe we have space for only one more question or comment. I wanted to say something. I will read the learning curve of the Wikimedia movement is slow, and if one is aided by stable staff, like in the Wikimedia Argentina case, becomes much easier. So to say, this helps us in our weakest part, so that our strengths can become edits. I wanted to say something, of course, that I want to leave you my email here. I know that many of the present people are there in their first grant process. I've been there. I know the fear, the vertigo that you might feel. I want you to know that I'm solidary with you. I have been there. I have walked that. So please don't leave this step as alone. I am leaving you my email, so that if you want to send me your proposals, you want me to look at them, if you want me to give you some tips, by all means, please send them to me. I can take a look at them, and the idea is that you can if you're taking this enormous step, you can be successful in it, so that I know that many people, we have a majority of Latin America here, but to everyone outside of Latin America, please also keep growing. Please, we are here. I leave you my email inbox is open to every one of you.
Muchísimas gracias, de verdad.
Thank you very much.
Creo que me quedé corta con la descripción inicial de Ana en términos de
I left.
de verdad, creo que,
when I described Anna as being generous, I couldn't encompass all that she's. Her experience, her wisdom is present in every single word. She's the one who offered creating this workshop. This is her idea. This is something that I thank her immensely for. And please know for that from Anna's part, Anna is offering her support. Me as a program officer for Latin America and the Caribbean, you can also approach me. You can also approach your other officers in your respective regions. And after all this, learnings that I want to live with one in particular. I want to live with this question, which is, what is the story that we want to be, that we want to tell, that we want to share after the first year? This is a very good way of actually helping us write down what we want to make, what we want to perform, so that we should imagine who will we be in a year, and from there we should start drawing our path. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time.
Gracias.
I don't know. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Gracias, Sandy. Gracias siempre. Bueno, les mando un abrazo enorme. Cuídense y cualquier cosa ya saben dónde encontrar.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias. Adiós, Ana.
Chao.
Adiós. Gracias.
Dios, muchas gracias, saludos.
Listo. Mil gracias, Andy. Ya no te oigo.
No por nada, pero sí.
Pero a ver, te escucho. Te escucho,
Hola,
sí.
Aime.